After a deluge of subpar offerings from Marvel, we just got this little gem of clean, tight storytelling. Thunderbolts used a very unique technique that is not only uncommon in storytelling, but especially seems out of place on paper when you're talking about a superhero movie. There's a lot to learn here, so let's talk about that. Before we get into that though, here's a reminder to check out dcferguson.com for all my latest videos, overviews of my books, exclusive behind-the-scenes content for each of my series, and you can sign up for my newsletter. I should also mention that you can help me out in a big way if you like this video, subscribe, and share it with any friends that also enjoy the art of storytelling. So we're going to get into some analysis in a second, but before we do, I feel I should always mention that there will obviously be big spoilers ahead as we're discussing details that are key to the plot and climax of this new movie. If you haven't seen it yet, what are you waiting for? Yes, it's really good. Pause this and enjoy it, then come back and break down the fun details. With that out of the way, there are a couple of differences we notice right away in the intro to this movie. Unlike in Avengers or Guardians of the Galaxy film, we are very clearly, narratively focused specifically on Yelena. All characters in the film come second to her, and her struggle is at the core of the entire story. This can be very risky from a writing perspective because you're taking an ensemble cast of characters and hanging your narrative hat on the single one you decide is the main character. If that character sucks, for any number of possible reasons, then you're invariably going to have poor reception for the whole film by audiences. This has happened to Marvel before, and this has happened to Fox superhero movies before. The point is, big risk. However, Yelena is a surprisingly deep and nuanced character that is witty, intelligent, skilled, and has the right amount of pain under the surface. We're going to talk about that right amount of pain in a little bit, as it's very important in our own writing. In what is possibly the most surprising turn in a Marvel movie, we don't have a huge villain to confront at the climax of the story. No big CGI dragons to fight, no disposable B-tier villain that's super underdeveloped and a waste of a good actor. Instead, we have Bob. But Bob isn't a villain. Bob is a deeply troubled person that would be the last person you'd ever want to give a super soldier serum to. When the power goes to his head for a brief moment, we watch as he lays waste to our newly assembled team. But when an attempt to terminate him goes wrong, it awakens the opposite side of his fragmented mind. This part is wild because this isn't a multiple personality disorder that switches between good guy and bad guy. There are two aspects of the same person with severely manic episodes of being on top of the world and crippling depression. And instead of simply killing this guy to get the nuisance of his great power out of the way, Yelena makes the bold decision to bring him out of that bottomless hole of despair. The final boss of the movie, the great antagonist in this film, is poor mental health. The film doesn't have a villain per se, but more of a concept. Now this would be pretty daring in a superhero movie just by itself. What makes this movie especially great, and where we can really mine for gold in terms of storytelling lessons, is that this villain isn't just inside Bob, it's woven into the fabric of every character in the movie. The trauma of our past is the villain plaguing every one of our heroes in this film long before Bob decides to drown New York City in blackness in the final act. There was so much to that thread in the film that they didn't even have a chance to fully explore it. Honestly, it would have taken an entire miniseries to fully explore each member of the new Thunderbolts team before tying it all in. But two characters' traumas were briefly touched on, Yelena more so than US Agent, but it was enough to make the point that it was the common thread everyone in this team shared. Now, to be fair, using Bucky in this film is kind of a cheat code. Anyone that's been a fan of Marvel already knows his personal trauma and his checkered past, so using him as like a free pass where they don't have to do too much development for his character. It's already baked in. That said, the very notion of our antagonist or villain not being a person, but an idea or a concept like depression and trauma is not one you see come up often, like at all. Of all the thousands and thousands of films I've seen, and even more I have a passing knowledge of, only a few examples really sprang to mind, and none of them are action films. There's a pretty obvious comparison here to the animated film Inside Out, where main character Riley is learning to accept sadness and deal with her emotions, which are characters themselves inside her head. Another film worth a slightly deeper dive into is the film Donnie Darko. This was one of those films I genuinely had to sit with for a good long while after it was over, partly due to the ending, which I won't really spoil, but the climax of this story comes not with the reveal of a big bad, but coming face to face with a force of nature. We also see this aspect in survival movies, like Castaway, where there's no clear villain, yet the hero must overcome great trials of nature. There is a singular universal truth in tying all these very different stories together. Overcoming these trials means learning to live with them. Missing years of your life stranded on a desert island isn't a villain to beat up. It's something you overcome so that you can learn to live with it. The same is true with Inside Out. Sadness and grief never goes away. It becomes easier to live with. Donnie Darko, as abstract an ending as it was about Donnie learning to accept the nature of things, even if that means that his story ends there. Here in Thunderbolts, each of our would-be heroes have been monsters and villains and killers for so long that they've been traumatized by the past that shaped them, and yet this moment, saving Bob and by extension saving the people of New York, is about learning to live with the demons and wrongs done to us in our past and not letting it crush us under the weight of it. This is partly why putting Yelena front and center is such an intelligent choice. Her callousness toward ending human life and destroying property reflects her own apathy towards the value of her own life. She feels so alone in part due to the monstrous nature of her job, one she's been trained violently from childhood to do. The other part, though, is this loss of her sister, Black Widow. So on top of the loneliness and the dark nature of the work she does, she is also dealing with grief. It's also here where we see some of the genius of the storytelling. Yelena starts out the movie seeking out her adoptive father, Alexei, the Red Guardian. She talks about this emptiness that she's feeling. She wants to know how to give herself a purpose that will make her stop feeling so hollow. Later on, in the Act 2 drop of our story, Red Guardian chases after Yelena after she's given up on trying to be the good guy, in a conversation that was surprisingly mature, adult, and well written. Yelena talks about the pain that she's went through and what she felt she needed. The reason I say this is genius is because this is a character that is ready to heal. She's searching for answers in the beginning of the story, and she's open and honest about her feelings in this conversation. She's being receptive. If you compare her character to U.S. agent still lying to people about his family back home, Yelena is the most honest, ready, and open to make a change. And when everyone runs from the threat that Bob becomes as Void, Yelena walks into it. It is very easy in this scene to dismiss this as her own death wish or an apathy towards her own life. I think it's a little deeper than that. I think after talking to Alexei, she's finally ready to be a hero. When she stands before the Void, she doesn't expect to die. She knows that his power is going to bring her back to that dark place in her mind. She's ready to learn to live with it and reconcile with it in order to reach Bob. This is a huge growth moment. She was willing to sacrifice herself and face her worst demons to save someone. It took her example to be the first one to jump into that abyss that gave everyone else the courage to take the plunge too. They figured they were stronger together, and they were right, but Yelena, she did that by herself, with no expectation that help was coming. Are you starting to see the layers to the story that I'm talking about? These themes were written into the DNA of this story. This is what theme looks like in practice, and it's a thing of beauty when it's well done. Now, what did I mean when I said earlier that Yelena has the right amount of pain? Well, this is a real juggling act, and it applies to both genders, but the expression between them is very different. If your character has a tragic or painful backstory, it's imperative that you understand how this both affects and informs their mental health. The way that you convey this to your audience has to be measured. If the expression is too weak, the impact of the trauma can come off as either not that big of a deal, or even that the character is somewhat aloof to their own tragedy. For a film that does this, look at Captain Marvel. Between amnesia and betrayal by the very people that she thought had saved her, all of her lost memories, relationships, and time don't seem to bother her very much. The performance is so wooden that they made an active attempt to address it in the sequel, showing that she's having a lot of trouble with it. As a result, the original movie didn't hit well with audiences. Now, if the opposite's true, that the pain and trauma seems to affect them too much, you get a character that feels a little whiny. Every time you turn around, they're turning a scene into their own therapy session, telling you how tragic their tragic backstory is. It gets tiring, and each time they do it, it loses impact. We see this with Anakin Skywalker in Star Wars Episode 2. Every scene is Anakin complaining about the Jedi Council. Or he's complaining about Obi-Wan and the way he's being mentored. Or he's complaining about being unable to save his mother. Now keep in mind, it's not that he's wrong. It's not that these aren't tragic events. The problem is when every scene involving him and every character that talks to him is forced to hear him complain about how unfair everything is, well, it starts to sound self-centered and whiny, and the audience gets numb to having empathy for them. With that in mind, we look again to Yelena. She does her job with this detached apathy toward the work, toward the value of human life, toward the obvious evils of the person she's working for. That said, she still does her job. When she feels like she's ready for a change, she calls Valentina and asks for that change. When Alexei tells her to let her emotions out, she does so in an open and honest way. In between that, she does her job, she fights, and she makes a decision to team with this group to save Bob from Valentina. It's not that she turns her trauma on and off like a switch. It's more like she's only confronting it when she's putting into a situation where she has to, or she wants to. So, what lessons can we take away from this film? Well, there's two really big ones. As we just discussed, if your main character has a difficult or tragic past, try to hit that sweet spot with the right amount of pain. Allow the events of the story to force them to come to grips with it or face it somehow, make it relevant to the story, but also let's not beat the audience over the head with it. Make sure that they're not too stoic, that it doesn't feel like it matters to them, because then it won't matter to your audience either. The second big lesson is only if you find yourself daring enough to write a story without a clear and tangible villain. Make no mistake about it, Thunderbolts has a villain, and it's the pain, guilt, and depression that we all carry with us, turning us into a bad person. Every character in this movie has been a villain in a Marvel movie at one point or another. The truth they come to realize is that if they can let it go, maybe they can be heroes too. If we're going to do something like that in our own story, we want to weave in this concept, this idea that the characters are struggling with. We want that in the very DNA of our story. It touches every character to one degree or another, and it is a trial that they must overcome. Understanding this fascinating and rarely used technique is a great thing to add to our repertoire because when it's done well, you get great movies like Castaway or Donnie Darko. Thunderbolts is no exception. Thanks to some great storytelling and execution, I think we can comfortably put this one in the great example pile. That's great for fans of Marvel, but even better, it's a rare win for storytelling in Hollywood, and that's something we should all be grateful for. I wanted to discuss this film pretty much the second I left the theater. Sometimes you know when you've witnessed greatness in storytelling, and if I'm honest, it's the first time in a while that I was riding that high coming out of the theater. It feels great, and I love it. I can't recommend the film enough. We should always support movies when they get it right. It's the only way that we're ever going to course correct back to the stories that unify us. Don't forget to check out my new website, the link's in the description below. You'll also find the link to my newsletter in the comments where you can get a free book, read about all of my latest projects, and find other indie authors for your next great read. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear about new videos, and as always, have fun and get crafting.